Every rancher refused the bride with a scar across her face. A cattle baron kissed the scar. I almost didn't go to the station. That's the part I don't tell people, because it makes me sound like the kind of man I was trying not to be anymore. I had her letter on the kitchen table for 11 days. Read it 3 times the first night and then left it there, weighted down under the salt crock, like if I didn't look at it the thing would resolve itself without me having to make a decision. 11 days. My foreman, Clyde Pitts, came in for coffee on the 8th morning and saw the envelope. He didn't say anything right away, just poured himself a cup and stood looking out the window at the south pasture where we'd lost the fence line in the spring mud. After a while he said, "You going to get her or not?" I told him I hadn't decided. He nodded like I'd said something wise. Then he drank his coffee and went back out, and I knew by the careful way he didn't say anything else that he thought I was a fool. He wasn't wrong. The agency, the one out of St. Louis, Hargrove and Mack, respectable outfit I'd paid the fee in coin, had sent me her particulars the previous autumn. Name, age, background. Clara Elspeth Vane, 29, schooled in Missouri, late of a farming family east of Springfield, parents deceased. Good constitution, they wrote, which I knew even then was their way of hedging. Competent with household accounts. Some experience with livestock. Speaks plainly. And then the line I'd read 4 times before I set the paper down. She will be forthright with you about her appearance. We recommend you hear what she has to say before forming a judgment. That's a way to put it. Her letter arrived 3 weeks later. She wrote in a clean, even hand on plain paper. No ornamentation. She told me her name, her age again, what she could do and what she couldn't. She said she'd grown up on a working farm and wasn't frightened of hard weather or hard work. She said she was not a woman of great beauty, and she wanted me to understand that clearly before I answered, because she'd rather not make the journey and be sent back. Then she said, "There is a scar on my face, left side from my jaw to my cheekbone. It has been there since I was 13. I am not disfigured. I can see and speak and eat and smile. But it is visible and it is permanent, and I know it is the reason the agency has placed me last with every man on their list. I mention it here so you can write back and decline, if you choose to, without either of us wasting the other's time." That last sentence. I read it twice. Then I sat there in my kitchen with the lamp burning low and the night quiet outside and thought about what kind of woman writes a letter like that. Not begging, not performing. Just stating the facts of her situation with a steadiness that put me in mind of a man who's looked at bad weather before and knows how to get through it. I wrote back that same night, told her I'd like to meet, told her the arrangements. And then 11 days went by, and the salt crock sat on top of her reply, and I stood in my kitchen every morning lying to myself about what was making me hesitate. I know what it was. Same thing that made the 4 ranchers before me send her back. I'm not proud of it, I'm just telling you what's true. The Triple Bar was mine outright by then. 7,000 acres north of the Cimarron, good grass most years, a house I'd built myself when I was 32 with lumber hauled from Dodge. It was a real house, not a soddy 3 rooms downstairs, 2 up, a proper porch facing east. I had 12 hands on the payroll and a herd that had come back strong after 2 bad winters. By any measure a man applied in that country I had done well. What I didn't have was anyone to come home to. My wife Frances had died 6 years prior. Fever, the summer of 1878. We'd had 9 years together and 1 child who didn't live past 3 days. And after Frances, when I worked the ranch the way a man works when he's trying not to think. Hard and long and without stopping. My men knew not to ask. Clyde knew better than most, because he'd been there when they laid her in the ground, and he'd seen what the years since had done to me. Not broken, nothing like that, just worn down to something essential that had stopped caring about much beyond the work and the cattle and the land itself. I was 51 years old, and I had stopped expecting anything different. The agency's letter had come in October. I hadn't sent for a bride. What had happened was this. Hargrove and Mack had been recommended to me by a man named Bill Orvis at a cattle auction in Wichita, and I'd ridden back from that auction in a strange mood. Something the October light does sometimes, long and gold and making everything look like it's already gone. And I'd sat down and written a letter of inquiry that I then forgot I'd sent until their reply arrived 4 months later. That's how much I was expecting. I'd forgotten I'd even asked. There were 4 men before me. That part I learned later from Clara herself, in the way she told things matter of fact, no self-pity in it, just the sequence of what had happened. A farmer from out of Pratt County, a widower from up near Larned. 2 others she named only by their counties, not by their faces, which I think was its own kind of grace. Each of them had corresponded with the agency, received her description, and still sent for her, and each of them had met her at a station somewhere in Kansas and found a reason to decline within the first hour. The Pratt County man told the agent he'd been misled about her looks. The Larned widower said nothing, just handed back her bag and walked to his wagon. The other 2 she didn't elaborate on and I didn't press. 4 men. A total of perhaps 4 hours of being looked at and found wanting by strangers who'd written her letters and then discovered, standing on a depot platform with people watching, that they hadn't meant what they'd written. She'd made the journey from Missouri and back 4 times. When I finally understood the full shape of that, not just the distance, though the distance was real, but what it cost a woman of her particular kind of pride to do that 4 times, and then write a 5th letter that was still composed and still plain-spoken, and still offering me the chance to say no before she boarded the train again. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not admiration exactly, closer to recognition. I went to the station on a Tuesday in March. Cold morning, the kind that burns the inside of your nose and turns the mud to iron overnight. I'd driven the wagon myself rather than sending Clyde, which in hindsight tells you I'd made up my mind by then, even if I wasn't admitting it. The train from Topeka was 20 minutes late. I stood on the platform and watched the other people waiting, a family with a lot of luggage, a drummer with a sample case, 2 cowhands who looked like they'd slept in a ditch, and I thought about what I was doing and whether I was going to make a fool of myself. Not in the way the other men had made fools of themselves. The other kind. The kind where a man gets his hopes up about something and doesn't even know he's got them up until the moment he finds out whether it was warranted. I hadn't known I had hopes until I was standing on that platform in the cold with my hat in my hands. The train came in with a lot of steam and noise, and the platform got crowded in the way platforms do, everyone pushing toward the cars, and I stayed where I was near the far end because I'd rather people come to me than push through them. She was the last one off the 3rd car. I'll tell you exactly what I saw. A woman in a gray traveling dress, a dark wool coat that had seen better days, a worn leather traveling bag she carried herself. Medium height. Brown hair pulled back under a hat that was practical rather than ornamental. She moved with a directness that I noticed before anything else, not hurrying, just purposeful, like a woman who was going to do what she'd come to do and was not going to make theater of it. And the scar, yes, left side of her face. I saw it when she turned to look for me. Pale against her skin, not angry, not fresh, just there, the way an old brand mark is just there, part of the landscape of a thing. She found me, walked straight over without hesitation. "Mr. Aldred," she said. "Miss Vane." She looked at me directly, not performing courage, just looking, the way you look at a man when you're trying to figure out what you're actually dealing with. Her eyes were gray, the particular gray of good winter sky before snow, and they were very steady. I said, "I have the wagon. It's a 2-hour drive. If you're hungry, there's a place across the street, or we can eat at the ranch." She said, "The ranch is fine." And we walked off the platform together. That's not much of a moment, I know. No declaration. No drama. Just 2 people walking to a wagon in the cold. But here is what I'll tell you. The other men sent her back within the first hour. And within the first 5 minutes of standing on that platform, I already knew I wasn't going to do that. And not because I'd talked myself into anything noble or made any decision about my heart or any of the things people like to say when they're making a story of something. I wasn't going to send her back because she was what her letter had told me she was, and I'd been around enough horses and cattle and men to know that the thing a creature is in its unguarded moment is the only thing that's real. She'd stepped off that train exactly as represented. No apology, no performance, just the plain facts of herself, offered straight. I respected that. I respected it before I liked her and before anything else, and that respect was the root of everything that came after. She didn't talk much on the drive north. Neither did I particularly. We'd used up the introductions and neither of us was the kind to fill silence with noise. I told her about the ranch, the layout, the herd, what the work looked like through the seasons, what I'd need from her in practical terms. She listened without interrupting and asked 3 questions that were all precise and sensible about the kitchen setup, the water situation, and whether I had any milk cows or only beef stock. I had 2 milk cows, I told her. Good, she said, like that settled something. About an hour into the drive, the sky started doing something in the north, that particular flat darkening that means weather's coming and coming serious. I said so. She looked at it and nodded once. Didn't say anything about being cold or worried or whether we should turn back. Just pulled her coat tighter and stayed where she was on the seat. That small thing registered with me. A woman who looks at bad weather and doesn't flinch. By the time we reached the Triple Bar, the first snow was coming sideways off the plain, small hard flakes that stung. I got the horses in and she carried her own bag to the porch and stood there waiting, which I noted, not walking in before I opened the door, but also not hovering like she needed to be managed. Just waiting. Practical. I showed her the house. She looked at everything with the same steady assessment she'd used on me at the station. The kitchen, the larder, the layout of the rooms. She didn't say much was nice when it wasn't. She said the stove was a good one and the kitchen had good light, which was true, and she asked where I kept my tools because the hinge on the back door needed oil and she'd take care of it in the morning. I fed her and we sat at the kitchen table and talked for 2 hours. Not about the situation between us, not about what was going to happen or what we each expected. We talked about the ranch mostly, about cattle, about the grass conditions, about the trouble I'd had with a neighboring outfit over a fence line 2 springs back. She had more to say about cattle than I'd expected, growing up farming, and when she disagreed with something I'd done about the fence dispute she said so directly, laid out her reasoning, and turned out to be right, which I admitted. Around 10 o'clock, I said I'd made up the upstairs room for her. She said that was fine. At the door of the kitchen, she stopped and turned back and said, very plainly, I want you to know I understand what this arrangement is, and I'm not going to make it difficult for you. If at some point you want to end it, I'd only ask you tell me directly and not find an excuse. I said, I'm not looking to end it. She looked at me for a moment. All right, she said, then she went upstairs. I sat in the kitchen a while longer with the lamp burning, and the snow against the windows, and the house doing something it hadn't done in 6 years, which was feeling like more than a place I slept. The next 6 weeks are harder to tell because they weren't a story so much as a life. Small increments. The way she organized the kitchen after the first week without asking permission or making an announcement, just rearranging things into an order that turned out to be more sensible than mine had been. The way she learned the rhythms of the ranch, when the men came in, when I needed quiet, when the schedule shifted for weather without being told, just by watching. She was up before me most mornings. She brought Clyde and the other men coffee in the mornings without making it a performance of hospitality, just set the pot where they could reach it and left them to it. She ate supper with me. We talked. The conversations weren't different in kind from those first 2 hours, practical, ranging, her asking good questions and pushing back when she thought I was wrong. Twice more in those 6 weeks she turned out to be right about something I was doing and said so plainly, and both times I sat with the annoyance of it for about a minute before agreeing with her. A man my age doesn't get told he's wrong very often, not because he isn't, but because people have stopped bothering to tell him. The men who work for him won't. His neighbors are too polite or too involved in their own business. There's no one in particular who has occasion to sit across a kitchen table from him every night and notice where his thinking's gone lazy. She noticed, and she said so, without meanness and without making a thing of it. I can't explain how much that mattered. I'd been running the Triple Bar alone for 6 years, and I thought I'd made my peace with the particular loneliness of it. Not the loneliness of missing Frances, that was its own thing, deep-seated and private, but the everyday loneliness of having no one to check your reasoning against. No one to say, wait, have you thought about it this way? She was that. The town was Millard, 14 miles south on the stage road. We went in together the third Saturday for supplies. I'd been going alone for 6 years, and I knew how the town was organized and who mattered in it, and I didn't think much about what it would mean to walk in with her. I found out. Not dramatically. It wasn't one person or one moment. It was the quality of the silence when we walked into Kern's Dry Goods, and the way Ed Kern's wife looked somewhere just past Clara's shoulder when she spoke to her, and the conversation I overheard in the hardware between Dobie Strath and another man whose name I don't recall. They didn't know I was 2 aisles over. Strath said something about Aldred's mail-order girl, and the other man made a sound that wasn't words, and they both laughed. I came around the corner and looked at Strath and said, very quietly, "You want to say that again?" He didn't. His face went the color of old saddle leather, and he found something urgent to attend to on the far side of the store. That was the end of it in terms of anything being said out loud, but I knew what the town thought. A man of my standing, 7,000 acres, 12 years of being a fixture in Millard, and he'd taken up with the scarred woman the agency had been trying to place for 2 years. There were people in that town who thought less of me for it. I could feel it the way you can feel weather, not see it exactly but feel the pressure of it. And I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I did not care. Not because I'd decided to be above it. I hadn't made any noble decision. I just measured it against the weight of what I'd actually found. A woman who could run a ranch account, who looked at bad weather and didn't flinch, who told me I was wrong and was right about it, who made the house into something it hadn't been in 6 years, and the math wasn't complicated. I want to tell you about a specific morning, end of April, 3 months or so after she'd arrived. I'd been out since before first light with Clyde and 2 other men, moving the main herd up from the winter pasture. It was not a bad drive, but it took all day. One of the cows died on it, which always makes for a grim last hour, and by the time I got back to the house, I'd been in the saddle since 4 in the morning, and I was cold through, and some part of me had come loose from the rest. That happens to me sometimes. Probably happens to most men who have been at something hard for a long time. Not anything you'd call grief exactly, just a kind of unmooring. You push through it and sleep, and usually it's gone by morning. She was in the kitchen when I came in. Lamp lit, stove going, something on that smelled like it had been waiting. She looked at me once and didn't say anything, just set a plate on the table and poured coffee without asking whether I wanted it. I sat down. I ate and didn't talk, and she sat across from me with her account book open, going through the household figures, which I'd given over to her at the end of March, because she was better at it than I was, and we both knew it. After a while she closed the book and set her pen down and said, "Bad day." "Not a question." "Lost one on the move," I said. "Old Brindle, the one with the off-year, 12 years on this place." She nodded. "I know which one." She'd only been here 3 months, and she knew which one. I don't know why that got to me the way it did, right then in particular. Maybe because it meant she'd been paying attention not just to the accounts and the household, but to the actual things, the animals, the land, the small particular details of this specific place. I sat there looking at my coffee for a while. Then she said, and the way she said it was quiet, not making anything of it, "You've kept this place going through some hard years. That's not nothing." I didn't answer right away. There wasn't anything to say to that. It was just true, and she'd said it plainly, the way she said everything, and the particular way it landed was this. No one had said it to me in 6 years. Not Clyde, not any of my men, not anyone in Millard. Not because they didn't know it was true, but because it's not the kind of thing people say. A man is supposed to keep his place going and not require acknowledgement for it. She said it like it mattered. I looked up at her. She was watching me with that gray gaze, steady, not performing sympathy, just present. I said, "I'm glad you stayed." She held my gaze for a moment. Then something shifted in her face. Not the scar at all, just the look in her eyes changing from steady to something warmer. She said, "I haven't been sent back yet." Which was her way of making a joke. I knew it was because there was the faintest shift at the corner of her mouth. I said, "You're not going to be." She nodded once, opened her account book again. We were married in June. In Millard, in the church, because I wanted it done right and I wanted the town to see it. Clara had asked whether I minded doing it quietly, and I told her I didn't do things quietly that I wasn't ashamed of. She looked at me for a moment when I said that, something in her face that she didn't put into words. The Reverend was a man named Pullman who'd buried Francis and didn't make any comment about the circumstances, which I respected. There were not many people there. Clyde came and 2 of the longer-serving hands, and a woman named Harriet Oakes who had been kind to Clara in Millard, gone out of her way to be kind, which I had noted and intended to remember. The Straths were not there. That suited me. I'll tell you the moment from that day that stayed with me. After, on the steps of the church, before we walked to the wagon, Clara had her hand on my arm. She was wearing a dress she'd made herself, dark blue, plain, good work. And Harriet Oakes came up and embraced her and said something I couldn't hear, and Clara answered her, and then Harriet stepped back and looked at her with a particular expression, warm and also a little fierce, the way women look at each other when something matters, and Clara turned back to me. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me the first day on the station platform, direct, taking stock. Except now there was something else in it that hadn't been there then. She put her hand in mine, and we walked to the wagon. I'm 60 now, or close enough it makes no difference. Clara is 37. We've been married 9 years, which means she's been on this land 9 years, and at this point she knows it better in some ways than I do, the account books, the household, the garden she put in behind the east wall, the particular social landscape of Millard, and who is worth dealing with and who isn't, which I defer to her judgment on almost entirely. I still run the cattle. That'll be mine until it can't be. She doesn't try to take that from me. She knows it's not hers to take. But when there's a decision to be made about the ranch, a real decision, not just the daily business of it, I tell her the situation and she tells me what she thinks. And I would be lying if I said her thinking hasn't shaped the Triple Bar in the last 9 years in ways that run deeper than the accounts. She was right about the fence dispute in the end, all those years ago. She was right about selling off the north section when the grass went bad 2 winters back when I wanted to hold it. She was right about taking on Clyde's nephew when Clyde asked, which I was against because I don't like nepotism in a work outfit, and the boy turned out to be the best horseman on the property. She's right about a lot of things. I've learned to listen for it. I don't always like it, but I've learned. Last spring there was a night late March, a cold snap coming back after a false thaw, and I was out checking the herd past midnight because the temperature had dropped hard, and one of the younger cows was close to calving, and I didn't trust the night. When I came back and Clara was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low and a cup of something hot. She'd known I'd come in cold. I sat across from her and wrapped my hands around the cup, and the kitchen was quiet and dark except for the lamp, and outside you could hear the wind doing what wind does on the Cimarron Plain in March, which is nothing kind. She was looking at her hands, not at me. After a while she said, without preamble, the way she says things, "I want you to know something." I waited. "I know what this was when I came here," she said, "what it was in the beginning, and I know I wasn't what most men would have chosen." I started to say something. She stopped me with a look. "Let me finish," she said. "I know what it was, and I want you to know that whatever I thought this was going to be or not be, it's the best thing that happened to me. You're the best thing, not because you were kind. You were, but that's not what I mean. Because you looked at me and you saw what was there and you didn't decide it wasn't enough." She paused. "That's not nothing, Emmett." She had turned my words back on me. From that night in April with the old cow. I looked at her across the kitchen table. The lamplight did the thing it does to her face, which has always been the same, the scar and the skin and the gray eyes and the whole of her, which I stopped sorting into parts a long time ago, probably within the first month, maybe sooner. I reached across the table and took her hand. Then I did what I've done twice in 9 years, both times at moments that called for it. I turned her hand over and I leaned forward and I pressed my mouth to the scar on her face. Not demonstratively, quietly, the way you touch something that matters. She went very still. She didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything. And outside the wind went on and the lamp went on and the kitchen held us both. I think about the 4 men sometimes. Not with judgment. I told you I understood it, and I did, because I almost did the same thing. I think about them the way you think about a road you didn't take, not with regret exactly, just with a kind of wonder at how close things are to going different. 11 days I had the salt crock sitting on her letter. 11 days of telling myself I hadn't decided. What I know now is this. A man can spend a long time looking for something big, a sign, a revelation, a feeling he can name, when what's actually on offer is a woman in a gray dress stepping off a train and looking at him straight, not asking him to be anything other than what he is, asking only that he look back the same way. She saved me, though she wouldn't use that word. Not from anything dramatic, not from death or ruin. From the particular slow diminishment of a man who's closed himself off to everything that can disappoint him, which is also everything that can matter. She saved me from spending the rest of my years on this land with nothing but the land, which is good and mine, and not enough. That's what I didn't know, standing on that platform in the cold. What I knew by the time we reached the wagon was that I was going to marry this woman if she'd have me. She had me. The Triple Bar is still standing, 9 years on. The cattle are good this year. The house has her garden behind the east wall and her account books on the kitchen shelf, and her particular way of leaving a lamp burning low when she knows I'm coming in from a late night. I'm 60 years old, and some part of me that went cold in the summer of 1878 has been warm again for 9 years, and I know exactly whose doing that is. And I think about it most mornings when I wake up and she's already in the kitchen and I can smell the stove going. I don't take it for granted. A man who almost didn't go to the station doesn't get to take it for granted.